I feel like learning how to code in current year has become such an uphill battle for absolute beginners. I mean, there's so many AI tools available now that I feel like most beginners just end up vibing instead of actually learning the fundamentals of programming. The job market is an absolute wreck, so hopefully you aren't learning how to code for the purposes of just making some money. And now it's come out that Notepad++, one of the most commonly recommended source editors for beginners and casual programmers, has been the target of a supply chain attack by a Chinese advanced persistent threat group named Lotus Blossom. Now, for you no-coders who haven't heard of this program, I would describe Notepad++ as most people's first long-term source code editor. I know the kids these days are probably vibing on Cursor, but back in my day, Notepad++ was the GOAT, and as the name implies, it's kind of like an improvement to Notepad, right? Because, if you think about it, the regular Notepad that ships with Windows, it was just a very basic text editor. I know that Microsoft recently updated it, and now it's a broken AI bloated markdown editor that has its own security vulnerabilities, but back in the day, the Notepad that shipped with Windows was very basic. It didn't give you any syntax highlighting when you were editing source code. If you were writing a Python script, it wouldn't automatically indent things for you. There was no autocomplete within Notepad, and hell, it didn't even have tabs until like 1 year ago. But Notepad++, it had all that stuff. It made source editing so much better. And it beats out Sublime Text because it's actually free and open source. It beats VS Code because it's not a bloated Electron apps that eats up all your RAM just for you to edit a couple of Python files. And I would even say it's better than Vim because you don't have to spend a month learning how to use it in order to be more efficient at editing text. So Notepad++, it just works out of the box. And it's always those ubiquitous just works programs, or in this case, the update infrastructure for the program that everyone uses that ends up being an excellent target for these kinds of attacks, especially when the software is being used by a lot of sysadmins and developers that have privileged access to an organization's files. If you can own the sysadmins or the developers, then you can probably end up owning most of the enterprise. It doesn't just matter how secure the application itself is. The app can be free and it can be open source, just like Notepad++, but that doesn't magically protect the infrastructure that's around it, the infrastructure that handles the updates. If the updates for your app are coming from a hosting provider that you don't control and they get compromised, then hackers don't need to modify the actual source code of your application in your Git repo in order to own your users. And what makes this supply chain attack here even trickier is the fact that Notepad++ comes with an auto update feature. So just simply running an outdated version of Notepad++ with auto updates enabled is all it really took for people to get hacked. And this software update infrastructure compromise is actually a lot sneakier than compromising the app itself. Because if you think about it, with open source software, the source code is open, right? It's open source, it's available for anybody to look at, and while it's true that 99.999% of users of this software and software like it will never end up inspecting the source code, that elite 1 in 100,000 will probably end up discovering a backdoor or a bug, ideally before it gets published to the stable production version of the software that most people use, just like we saw with the discovery of the backdoor in the XZ compression library. But with Notepad++, the malicious update payload, which security researchers have named Chrysalis, was only triggered on specific targets. So the vast majority of people were actually able to update their Notepad++ application without any issues and not getting hacked, but the lucky few people that this Chinese APT group wanted to target would end up having their gup.exe, which is the generic updater that runs when Notepad++ is out of date, connect to a malicious endpoint instead of the legitimate Notepad++ update server. Now, normally, the generic updater would fetch an update manifest and download the installer for the latest version of Notepad++, verify it, and then install that updated app. But if you're one of the targeted individuals, then you would get a program called update.exe downloaded from a hacker-controlled server. Update.exe is a NSIS installer, which is a widely used tool for software distribution in Windows, but it also has the advantage for hackers of obfuscating this malicious script in order to help it bypass antivirus software. This installation script creates a new directory called Bluetooth in the app data folder. It copies the remaining files there, hides the new Bluetooth directory, and then executes another program planted in there called Bluetooth service.exe. After this executable is ran, a malicious log.dll gets sideloaded alongside the executable, and this malicious log.dll decrypts and runs in memory the final malicious payload, which creates a persistent backdoor into the victim's machine. Looking back at reports that were made a few months ago, the organizations that were being targeted were primarily in East Asia, so the Chinese government is probably paying this hacking group in order to spy on those organizations, maybe steal some trade secrets, you know, the usual state-sponsored hacker stuff. Notepad++ really is a juicy target for state-sponsored hacking, not just because of the auto-update feature and sometimes people putting too much trust in open source software, but if we actually take a look at the download section of Notepad++, some of these releases come with messages that, you know, these state-sponsored hacking groups, or at least their governments, might not be too fond of. They've shown support for Ukraine 4 times in a row, which of course this would be more relevant if the hacking group that attacked Notepad++'s update infrastructure was Russian, but if we go back about a year before that, we can see that Notepad++ was showing support for Taiwan's sovereignty and a return to the United Nations. They've also shown support in the past for Hong Kong, and they've shown support for the Uyghurs, you know, free the Uyghur people. And back in the past, I think they also released something that was talking about, oh yeah, here we go, the Tiananmen June 4th Incident Edition, you know, making a reference to the Tiananmen Square Massacre, basically speed running the lowest possible social credit score that you could get. And I'm not saying that this is the real reason they got hacked. I mean, obviously the vulnerability in the update infrastructure was the main factor, but you can see why a country that is petty enough to ban Winnie the Pooh because people said it looks like the country's leader might actually go out of their way to backdoor an application like this, especially when it's extremely useful for espionage. So what can we take away from this? Well, if you've been using Notepad++, you should definitely update to the latest patch version since there have been security fixes for this issue, and look through your systems for the indications of compromise related to this incident, which you can find on Rapid7's website, and I'm going to link that below in this video's description. Be cautious about automatic updates to software. Try to figure out where the updates are actually coming from, and if you really trust that distribution mechanism, especially for userland programs like this. And it's hard to judge how much mocking totalitarian governments about their human rights abuses actually pushes them to go out of their way to try and hack you. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to make a statement about these human rights abuses on your website, it's probably a good idea to just double check your entire infrastructure to make sure that those nation states can't attack you so easily.